when you talk about mystical knowledge, a lot of people have trouble with mystical knowledge because when we speak, speech and reason are intertwined.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit on how, what exactly is mystical knowledge? If it's something that seems to be different from rational and empirical knowledge.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, absolutely. People raise an objection, which I think is based really quite straightforwardly on a misunderstanding, that mystical knowledge, according to the prescription of the advocates of mystical knowledge, is a tawr wara al-aql. It's a stage or domain, it's a level, it's a world beyond the aql. And therefore, how can that be used as a premise in rational thinking? How can that be in any way knowledge which, well, it might be interesting to read about people's claims of their experiences, but how can it form part of our overall picture of reality, which is supposed to be accessible to everyone, for example? Well, I think this is based on a basic misunderstanding of what being a tawr beyond the aql means. For one thing, there's a distinction between the discursive aql, which is the aql which essentially reasons in a straight line. 1 + 1 = 2. Every A is B, every B is C, so every A is C. That kind of logical, discursive, linear reasoning. And there's al-aql min haythu huwa qabil, which you might call the receptive intellect. And that's the aql which simply discerns distinct objects, right? So whether those are intelligible objects, as in pure concepts, let's say universals. They've got this universal and you've got this universal. You've got the universal of human being and the universal of just purely abstract concepts like unity and multiplicity and things like that. And because you can distinguish between them, they are distinct in themselves. Yeah. You can intend as an intentional object that one or that one. The same with sensible objects. You distinguish between them. And the thing is, mystical experience is exactly the same, because the mystical experience is distinct. So the point I'm trying to make is, yes, mystical experience is a tawr, is a stage or domain or world beyond the discursive aql, right? The aql which reasons in a straight line in that fashion. But so is the sensible world. Just as much. The sensible world is also a tawr beyond that discursive aql, right? So the point is, people have these misconceptions about reasoning, which are maybe insufficiently philosophical, as if reason is somehow this self-explanatory thing. Well, in fact, reasoning is just a form, right? It's a form which requires matter. So in logic, you have this distinction between logical form and logical matter. So logical form is just, say the figures of the syllogism. The fact that you have to have, you have to have a first premise, you have to have a second premise, you have to have a conclusion, and then how do you get from the premise to the conclusion, where it's by the middle term, and then what position is the middle term in the first premise? If it's in, let's say, the predicate position, then it's the first figure. If it's the predicate position of the first figure in the first premise, and etc. So, and if it's the subject position in the second premise, then it's called the first figure. That's the form. Now, that in itself is completely empty. That's the logical form. That's not ever going to get you anywhere, except seeing that that logical form has to produce a true conclusion. But but at this stage, because we're only at the stage of logical form, we don't even know what we're reasoning about. You have to be reasoning about something. Right. So the idea that you can include mystical knowledge, well, if you can include sensible knowledge, if you can reason about sensible objects, right, which are again a tawr beyond discursive reason, you can also reason about mystical objects.
Elaborate for us on where would we place mystical knowledge in epistemology? Will it be downgraded because it's something we all don't have access to it and to checking it?
Well, there's a distinction, obviously, between metaphysics and epistemology, which is really an Artibadi distinction, but doesn't make it not real. So it's perspectival, but you can have perspectival properties which are real, because it's about your means of approach to reality, right? So saying which one has priority, metaphysically, mystical knowledge has ascendancy over sense knowledge and merely rational knowledge. But epistemologically, we're talking about priority in terms of sequence. How do you get to the conclusion that you're going for? Now, mystical knowledge is of absolutely no use if it's not regulated by the other aspects of human experience, because we're not just spiritual beings, we're not esoterists. It's not the only mystical knowledge. Now, that's a mistake that a lot of modern people who are very interested in spirituality tend to make. They might be total modernists about philosophy. They might be even really methodological skeptics. They might not even believe you can prove the existence of God using reason, but they're esoterists, as in, I can get on with just making money and being in this world and being, totally worldly, because none of that really matters. The secret access that I have is to this mystical knowledge, which that's the only true knowledge, right? I don't mean totally worldly, obviously, in the sense of, being a hedonist, because if they're spiritual, they're unlikely to be like that. But I mean in the sense that there's no integration between my metaphysical view and my reason, right? It's just pure esotericism. Other than that, I'm just, it's just the world. It's just, it's just the, the world which is somehow opposed fundamentally to the spiritual. And so the point is, I'll give you an example. The Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani says in Sharh al-Mawaqif, mystical experience cannot be used to prove the creed on a public level. Something very interesting. It's because the Jews and the Christians, and I think he particularly confines it to the Jews and Christians, maybe he says other religions as well, but they also have spiritual experiences by which they claim somehow prove the truth of their creed.
Correct.
That's why he says mystical knowledge has to be supplemented by a rational framework, by rational arguments.
Correct.
Right? Because we believe in reason, we believe in rationality. So the point is, yes, no, I mean, in terms of the first stages of knowledge of the world, it's not that we, before teaching someone how to read and write and how to reason and basic stuff and how to use their senses, we just put them into a khalwa and that's how they get to know everything. Quite to the contrary, the rational framework, proofs for the existence of of God, Allah Ta'ala, of prophethood, of the basic items of creed, that has to come first, and that absolutely has to serve there as a foundation.